Apollo astronaut Charles Duke keyed his radio from the surface of the moon and reported constructed structures, angular, block-built, unmistakably artificial, and Houston went silent for 30 seconds. When they finally responded, they told him to continue with planned sample collection. No follow-up, no curiosity, no shock, just a flat instruction to move on, as if they already knew. Duke kept quiet for 40 years. Now, at 89, he's breaking his silence. And what he's saying explains exactly why we never went back. The voice in the room. Charles Duke was the man NASA trusted with its most consequential moment. On July 20th, 1969, he was the voice of mission control as two men descended toward a world no human had ever touched. Contact light. Engine stop. Tranquility base here. The Eagle has landed. Duke's response went out to the entire world. Cool, dry, completely steady. He told them a bunch of guys in Houston were about to turn blue from holding their breath. It was the man. In the most watched moment in human history, with hundreds of millions of people listening, his voice didn't waver by a fraction. He joined NASA in 1966, selected from thousands of candidates. A United States Air Force test pilot, razor sharp, unshakable. Precision was his language. Facts were his religion. He was not someone who exaggerated. He was not someone who imagined things. He was selected for the lunar program exactly because under any pressure, in any situation, he reported only what was real. 3 years later, he walked on the moon himself. The mission. Apollo 16 launched April 16, 1972. Duke and Commander John Young descended to the Descartes Highlands on April 21st and stayed 71 hours, longer than almost any crew before them. Their target was an ancient rugged region scientists believed held volcanic origins, one of the most geologically complex landing sites in the entire Apollo program. They drove the lunar rover across terrain no human eyes had ever seen. They ran every experiment on the checklist. They collected 95 kilograms of samples from craters and ridgelines, more than any prior mission. When they returned to Earth, NASA reviewed the mission record and issued its assessment. Every objective met, every box checked. The crew had performed flawlessly. The science was exceptional. Duke has never disputed that assessment. What he disputes is what the assessment left out. NASA called it one of the most successful Apollo missions ever flown. Flawless. That is the official version. The structures. 6 kilometers from the lunar module, far side of a ridge where Earth wasn't even visible in the sky above them. Just Duke, Young, the rover, and an endless gray desolation stretching to a razor-sharp horizon. Routine geological sample collection. Methodical. The kind of task you run on autopilot while your mind wanders, while your hands move through the checklist, and the silence of the lunar surface wraps around you like something physical. Duke has described those stretches of routine work as almost meditative. After days on the surface, you stop fighting the alien quality of it, and you just move, just work, just exist inside it. The crunch of boots on regolith, the soft hiss of the life support system, the distant crackle of an open radio channel. Then Duke looked toward the horizon, and everything changed. Something was wrong with the shapes. On the moon, everything is random. Craters, boulders, rubble scattered by billions of years of meteorite impacts. Nothing has clean edges. Nothing is regular. That's not an opinion. It's the geology. The moon is chaos made solid. But what Duke saw on that horizon had edges, geometry, lines too straight, angles too uniform, too deliberate to be natural. He called it out to Young. Young stopped the rover immediately. He saw it too. They drove closer slowly. The rover kicked up fine gray dust that hung in the airless vacuum before settling back like powder. Neither of them spoke. The radio was open, but silent, just breathing. Duke has said that in that approach, he and Young didn't need to discuss what they were looking at. The shapes were doing the communicating. Every meter they covered made the sight harder to deny, and neither of them tried. As they closed the distance, the shapes resolved into something that made every hour of training, every briefing, every assumption about what the moon was supposed to be completely irrelevant. A wall or a foundation, angular, made of blocks, covered in a thick layer of lunar dust, but unmistakably constructed, not carved by impacts, not shaped by geology, not the product of any natural process they had ever been briefed on. Built, deliberately built, by something with intelligence and purpose. Duke has estimated it stretched roughly 100 meters in length and disappeared into the surface at both ends, sinking beneath the regolith, as though the moon had slowly swallowed it over eons. like they were seeing the exposed spine of something vastly larger buried underneath. The scale of it, Duke has said, was impossible to absorb quickly. You look at something that size, on a world where nothing like that is supposed to exist, and your brain keeps trying to reclassify it. Trick of the light, unusual geology, some optical distortion from the visor. But it wasn't any of those things. At close range, there was no version of reality in which it could be. Duke keyed his radio. He described what they were seeing to Houston in clear, precise language. Geometric formation, not natural, appears constructed approximately 100 meters in length, requesting guidance. Then nothing. Not the normal 1.3-second signal delay that becomes instinct on a lunar mission. 1 Mississippi response. That's the rhythm Duke knew cold. Every exchange on every mission runs on that 1-second beat. You know it the way a musician knows a metronome. This silence broke the beat entirely. 2 seconds, 5, 10. Duke and Young looked at each other through their visors. Two men on the surface of the moon who had spent years training for every possible contingency. And neither of them had a protocol for this. Duke called again. "Houston, do you copy?" Nothing. 20 seconds. 30. He could hear his own breathing inside the helmet. The hiss of the suit's oxygen system. The faint crackle of the open channel, carrying only static from 240,000 miles away. He looked back at the structure while they waited. Still there. Still real. Still impossible. The gray blocks sitting in the ancient lunar dust as though they had always been there. Waiting for exactly this moment. Two humans close enough to read the geometry, far enough from any help that it didn't matter. Two men on the moon, completely alone, staring at something that shouldn't exist. And the only people who could hear them had gone deliberately quiet. When Houston finally responded, the voice was flat and controlled. No curiosity, no alarm, no follow-up questions. The response was an instruction to continue with planned EVA sample collection activities. That was it. The entire reply to two astronauts reporting apparent artificial structures on the lunar surface. No request for more detail. No shock. Just a cold instruction to move on. As if they already knew. If you want to know what those photographs reportedly show, and why they've never been released, subscribe now so you don't miss what comes next. The photographs. Duke and Young didn't move on entirely. They took photographs, dozens of them, close-ups of the blocks, wide shots showing the structure against the horizon, context photos from every angle they could manage before Houston repeated the order. Duke pressed the shutter himself. He saw the images in the camera. They were crystal clear. Those photographs have never been released, not one. Duke has asked NASA about them repeatedly over the decades. The answers keep changing. Classified for technical reasons, lost during archival transfer, image quality too degraded for public release. Each answer is different. None of them satisfy a man who was standing right there with the camera in his gloved hands. Duke has described his reaction as barely contained fury. He says with absolute certainty, those photographs are in a vault somewhere, buried under 50 years of institutional silence. But here's the detail that doesn't let you sleep. The structures themselves aren't even the most disturbing part. It's their age. In a 2019 interview, Duke was asked whether they looked recent. He shook his head slowly. He described them as eroded, worn in ways that shouldn't be possible on an airless world, because on the moon there is no wind, no rain, no weather of any kind to wear anything down. And yet, covered in micrometeorite impact craters, the kind that accumulate only over millions of years of constant bombardment from space, possibly hundreds of millions of years. The scientific term for what Duke was describing is simple: deep time. These were not structures from a recent visit. Whatever built them was there so long ago that the number of years involved approaches meaninglessness. They predated anything humans have ever built. They predated humans entirely. Duke paused in the interview when he said that, a long, heavy pause. Then he said, NASA knows, and they decided the public shouldn't. Whatever shaped those blocks did it long before our species existed on Earth. The anomalies. Here is what makes this harder to dismiss. The structures were the physical discovery, the photographed, reported, suppressed evidence. But Duke has said they weren't the only thing wrong with that mission. Go back and watch the unedited mission footage, not the highlight reels. The full, uncut recordings. There are moments where Duke freezes mid-sentence, mid-step. He stops moving and stares at something outside the camera's frame, something the lens never captures. Young's voice crackles through. Charlie, you okay? A pause. Then Duke, barely audible, he's fine, just looking. His voice sounds distracted, like a man trying to process something his training never prepared him for. Looking at what? The transcripts don't say. The post-mission reports don't mention it. The first anomaly was the light. Sunlight on the moon should be pure white. No atmosphere means no scattering. That's textbook physics. It was one of the things Duke knew before he ever landed, part of the basic briefing any lunar astronaut receives. But on the surface, he saw colors that had no business being there. Blues and purples shifting across the lunar surface. Not reflections off equipment or his visor. Not optical artifacts from the suit. The light itself was changing on a world where nothing is supposed to change. He'd look away and look back, and it would be different. The second anomaly was sound. On the moon, where sound is physically impossible. Not through the radio, not mechanical vibrations from the suit, but actual tones, actual frequencies. Sometimes harmonic, almost musical. Sometimes dissonant and deeply unsettling. Duke asked Young if he could hear it. Young said yes. Two of the most rigorously trained test pilots in human history, experiencing something that violates the basic laws of physics. They compared notes, their accounts matched. They told no one, because who would have believed them? Because the program would have ended for both of them if they had. Duke has said both phenomena were more concentrated near the structure, the light more intense, the tones louder, almost directional, as if the structure itself was the source, the others. Duke wasn't carrying this alone. In 2017, most of the surviving Apollo moonwalkers gathered privately, old men in their 80s, the only living human beings who had stood on another world. According to Duke, it was the first time any of them said it out loud. Everyone had. Anomalies, different things, different missions. None of their experiences matched what NASA told the public. They stayed quiet because no one would have believed them. Until they were old enough that reputation no longer mattered more than truth. Until they had nothing left to lose. Buzz Aldrin described a monolith-like object on Phobos, one of Mars' moons, and stated directly that it warranted serious immediate investigation. No hedging, no exit taken. Edgar Mitchell came back from the lunar surface a changed man and spent his final years stating plainly, in interview after interview, that extraterrestrial intelligence is real and that governments have known it for decades. Interviewers offered him easy outs every time. He never took one. Al Worden, who orbited the moon during Apollo 15, told an interviewer flatly that he believed humans descended from beings who came from somewhere other than Earth. The interviewer laughed nervously. Worden didn't blink. Decorated military, officers, Ph.D.-level scientists, men who had been selected from thousands of candidates and had spent their entire careers proving their judgment could be trusted with humanity's most consequential undertaking. When one moonwalker describes anomalies, you can dismiss it. When all of them do, independently across different missions, across different decades, that is not confusion. That is a pattern, the real reason. In 2023, someone asked Duke point blank, is there a cover-up? He described it not as conspiracy, shadowy men in dark rooms, but as institutional paralysis. NASA has data, photographs, observations from multiple missions, suggesting the moon is far stranger than the dead rock story. Releasing it would challenge what people believe about our place in the universe, about whether we are alone, about whether the entire framework of human history is complete. And so, year after year, decade after decade, they sit on it. Not malicious, Duke said, just cowardice. And that wasn't the real answer. That was the preamble. Because then Duke said the thing that finally explains 50 years of silence, the most consequential decision any space program has ever made, explained in a single sentence. The technology existed, the capability existed, the will existed, at least among the astronauts and engineers who lived and breathed the program. There were plans for lunar bases, there were missions already designed, there were astronauts already selected and training. The infrastructure was in place. The know-how was in place. By every technical measure, we were not done. We were just getting started. But we stopped after Apollo 17. In December 1972, 12 human beings had walked on another world. And then it was over. No gradual wind down. No replacement program waiting in the wings. Just a hard stop, as if someone flipped a switch. Humanity barely went back for half a century. Think about what that actually means. In the span of 4 years, 1969, to 1972, the greatest leap in exploration in all of recorded history. And then nothing. The official reason is budget constraints, Congress cutting funding, Vietnam, Watergate, all true on the surface. All of it documented, all of it verifiable. But those pressures had been present throughout the program. They were not new in December 1972. Something else changed. The real reason, the one nobody says out loud, is that the people making decisions realized the moon was raising questions they couldn't answer and weren't prepared to face publicly. Questions about who was there before us, what those structures mean, whether we are alone, whether we ever were. Questions that, if acknowledged, would unravel every assumption the modern world rests on. It was easier to stop going than to confront what was being found. We didn't stop because we ran out of money. We found something up there that we weren't ready to face, something that challenged everything we believe about human history and our place in the cosmos. And 50 years later, we are still not ready. The testimony. Charles Duke is 89 years old. He has lived a full life, raised a family, served his country in ways most people will never be asked to. He was the voice that guided humanity's first step onto another world. He walked on the moon himself 3 years later. He was, by every objective measure, one of the most accomplished and credible human beings of the 20th century. And now, in what he knows are his final years, he is doing something that would have ended his career, destroyed his reputation, and cost him everything if he had attempted it 3 decades ago. He is telling the world what really happened up there. Most people in their 80s spend their energy on legacy protection. They smooth the rough edges. They edit the record toward the version that will look best when the obituaries are written. Duke is doing the opposite. He walked on the moon. He saw things not in any official report. He reported things that were ignored. He took photographs that disappeared. He spent 40 years keeping quiet because the institutional weight of NASA, of the United States government, of the entire cultural consensus about what the moon is and what we found there, made speaking an act of professional suicide. He doesn't have that constraint anymore, and so he's talking. The structures are still there right now, as you watch this, sitting in the Descartes Highlands where they have been for what Duke believes are millions of years, silent, patient, unchanged. The photographs are in a vault somewhere, dozens of images, crystal clear, pressed by Duke's own gloved hands on an airless world. The questions those 12 men whispered at a private reunion are still unanswered. The program that could have answered them was shut down in December 1972, and the door has never been reopened. Why hasn't NASA ever released those photographs, and what exactly are they still protecting us from? Drop your answer in the comments, and subscribe now, because the Apollo missions left behind far more than NASA has ever wanted you to know. The moon was never empty.